Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight we are going to be discussing local industries in Rwanda and what we can do to boost their development locally, regionally, and continentally speaking. Very interesting conversation lined up here tonight. And with us we have the Director General of the National Industrial and Research Development Agency, Kamheta Sainzoga. Thank you for honoring us with your presence tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.
And as always, The Square is made up by myself, Dan and PC, and I'm joined here with my fellow resident panelists, Ephraim Rwamwenje.
Thank you for having me.
And Charles Haba.
Dana, how are you?
Good. Well, good to have you back. You were missing in our last edition.
Yes, I was missing in action, but I'm back, yes.
Thank you, and great to have you. Usually we're also joined with Brenda Namata, but unfortunately she's not here. She's away on business. So before we get into the thick of things, just before we started the show, we were discussing a couple of things that I think my fellow resident panelists would like to highlight. Any key highlights of the week that has been? Charles, I'll start with you.
I was wondering why we have been spending the last few days painting our pavements. And I discovered today, 2 days ago, that there's an arsenal of heads of state that's going to visit the country. So the Mozambican will come first, and then hot on his heels, the Chinese head of state, and immediately after, the Indian will be here, the Indian Prime Minister. So it's amazing. I'm sure we're going to be very busy. I just hope they don't chase us out of our city. Yes.
I think we've come far in terms of having like heads of state here and big events and dealing with different institutions, traffic police and mice in general. Hopefully it won't be a repeat of the
course,
last...
it's always nice. It's always nice when you have especially heavyweights like that coming, visiting us back to back. On the backdrop of campaigns such as Visit Rwanda, they don't come here just to shake hands and to appear good to the press. There's a particular reason, and it's humbling. Yes.
Ephraim?
Yeah, I think it's a sign of something. I always tell people, if you want to spot an opportunity in advance, follow the politicians. And that's always, at least it reigns true in business. So if you look at countries like China and India, even Mozambique, I'm sure there is a business forum that's going to take place as well. So that's also a huge opportunity for us to strengthen ties, especially as a private sector. So it's exciting, and I know obviously that the growing pains of stuff like this, so I anticipate we're going to have roads closed. But you mentioned institutional coordination, and it seems to be getting better. So hopefully we'll sing its praises at the end of the visits.
So we're going to get into the conversation, and right now we are here to discuss local industries, and NIRDA is an agency that is aimed at boosting local industries in the country. And Kamheta, my first question to you is to do with competitive strategy, and I'll just read a couple of stats before I get to the gist of my question. So according to the recently released national budget, we actually had a show on the national budget a couple of weeks ago. It stated that the industrial sector is expected to contribute to the national GDP by 8.3% in the financial year 2018-19 and 13.5% in the financial year 2019-2020. And this is just from its contribution to the GDP of 4% in the financial year 2017-2018. And it stated this is because of inroads made in the mining and construction sector. But my question for you is the industrial sector in Rwanda across the board remains relatively small. So can you tell us what is our national sort of strategy in terms of making us competitive regionally? Made in Rwanda products, made in Rwanda services. What are we doing to make ourselves, industrially speaking, competitive in the region?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So I would say the Made in Rwanda campaign, or the local industry development policy, is based on a couple of pillars. The first one is mindset. Everything we do in Rwanda, we don't believe that cash comes first. We believe that people's minds need to change. Mindset in terms of the consumers, and there's been a survey that showed that the consumer confidence on Rwandan products is going up. The last mile missing is confidence around quality, which is also something that needs to be addressed. So there's mindset in terms of the consumers actually embracing made in Rwanda product, but there's also mindset around the producers, having them focus on quality products and embracing technology and embracing modern ways of developing industries. The second one is really access to finance. You know, a lot has been done with BRD, the Innovation Fund, under the Kigali Innovation City umbrella or initiative. So making sure that you actually have funding for these initiatives at the firm level, not only on the government of Rwanda level through the budget, but also at the firm level. And the third one is really access to market, because you can have the best products if you don't have access to market, then, you know, it's kind of pointless. Markets in country and also outside Rwanda. And that's one of the key pillars of RDB strategy right now. And then the last one is really around innovation. And I think this is something that we've not talked about enough in the industrial world. How can we innovate in terms of product, processes, technologies, and make sure that that leads to better quality products?
Is there something my colleagues would like to add on this? Competitiveness and strategy of our industry, regionally speaking, and also locally, but also looking at a bigger picture across the region.
I can just step in and my opinion, I think, or at least my view on Rwanda's industrial strategy. There's a bit of mixed feelings when it comes to our strategy in relation to the fact that when you look at our competitiveness in relation to our neighbors, to be able to reach that kind of scale, to ensure that, again, our prices are affordable locally, and we're not, again, considering we're part of a much larger East African community, we cannot implement protectionist measures. I know in the world right now, there are a lot of trade wars going on between the US and China that are driven by policies around protecting local markets and local industries because of that aspect of competitiveness. And the question always comes in, what's the trade-off? And that's why I'm saying mixed feelings, because at the end of the day, we're like, okay, it would be better for us to specialize and at least have economic specialization within the region. So let each country that's good at the various things that it's good at focus on that. But the challenge then comes in, we at least need to build some internal capacity. And I know, and I hope to hear more about that, but I think for me, those are just my original sentiments.
I'd just like to touch on what you said in terms of, you know, markets in the East African community region. And I've heard of this before, whereby, you know, we're huge markets, over 162 million people, if you will. And what you just touched upon, like for instance, each country specializing in a niche in terms of what it actually exports to the other. And you know, enhancing trade. So if we are good at producing cheese, for instance, or dairy products, you know, we focus on that specifically, and then trade with Tanzania, who maybe are good with their cement sort of thing. Do you think that's something that's is practical? Do you think it's doable?
I think in economic theory it makes sense. Unfortunately, in reality, political reality, it's a tougher job. We live in a volatile region, whether we like it or not. And I think having industrial policies that are that well coordinated has proven to be quite problematic. It was one of the ventures when we started with the East African Community Harmonization agenda. Unfortunately, I must say it's been a lot of back and forth, 3 steps forth, 2 steps back. What we've taken as a position as Rwanda is to say there are some basic goods that could be produced locally by creating, that would help us create decent jobs and also recapture some of our domestic market in terms of giving Rwandans quality products. Not necessarily because we want to compete with Congo, Uganda, Kenya, but because we want to make sure that our population has access to these products in a way that is quality. So for example, garment is one of them. But then the way we look at it is we're not trying to compete on every single product with our neighbors. We're also trying to say which are the value chains, and that's the link between industrial development and the 4th industrial revolution that we're starting to tackle, is to say what other goods can we compete globally, of course regionally as well, but what can we do better than our competitors? And since we have the infrastructure, Rwanda has some advantages, you know, in terms of ICT infrastructure, good governance, corporate governance, in terms of skills in some areas, you know, a reliable climate. We all know, you know, our strengths. But the question now is, how do we use these strengths to start producing in value chains that do not necessarily exist among our neighbors? And that's where we're trying to venture now, is to say, yes, we have our existing traditional value chains that we can develop and we should develop, but we also need to be a bit you know, a bit venture capitalist,
Exactly.
a bit daring, and try to start thinking about sensors. Can we produce sensors made in Rwanda? Can Rwanda be known for made in Rwanda sensors, maybe, you know, as opposed to just thinking about traditional products. So yes, computers, phones are something that we can assemble and produce locally. But what if we kind of leapfrogged and went to the next level and thought about what are going to be the disruptive technologies of the future, and how can we, you know, leverage that and create skills for our youth to be ready to embrace those.
I'm glad that Pichette is talking about making a difference.
You mean Kamheta?
Both are okay.
And correct me if that's not your name, but carrying
They're
on
both
swiftly.
fine.
The leading age is really about what you can do different. And the head of state was on record the other day at the RPF Congress talking about not doing business as usual. If you're going to produce clothing, garments, as she was saying, what else, in what other way are you doing it in a different way that nobody else is doing it? And I'll take it to a notch higher and say, if we only look at our competition as what the region is doing, then we will miss the bus.
Yes.
We live in a global village. For crying out loud, Rwanda has invested significantly in a network of routes. And therefore, if we are not able to tap into taking our goods and bringing in services and people and taking out goods and services and people into those respective routes, then we're missing the bus. So, and I'm extremely keen to learn on, but what are those specific goods that we are looking at producing that will take us to a notch higher? Sometimes when I look at, and just let's pick one example of shoes, and then I look at Rwanda Revenue Authority or the policy maker, which is Ministry of Finance, taxing heavily imported shoes, whilst at the expense of encouraging homemade shoes. I wonder, do we have the right quality and quantity of homemade shoes that's going to make me and the four of us here wear Rwandan-made shoes? And I think we're probably missing the bus in terms of focus. Earlier on, Diana, you talked about minerals. If we are really seeing that wolfram and Columbia tantalite and the other, I think the big four, I stand to be corrected on that one, the other two, tungsten and whatever that fourth mineral is that is in our devices. It's just got a bit of a tongue twister. If that is where our age is, then shouldn't we allow everybody to bring in shoes so that all of us can wear as many shoes as we can? So it's really around the coordination and the focus and the priorities that will make us have a leading edge over our competitors. Yes.
So I would like, Diana, where I would disagree with Charles is, yes, we could say, well, we're only going to do fourth industrial revolution stuff and only going to produce sensors. But the truth of the matter is, we still have a large portion of the population that still have relatively low skills. I think the fourth industrial revolution stuff is to create decent jobs for the youth today and tomorrow. But the truth of the matter is, I think the Ministry of Finance imposing higher tariffs on shoes is second-hand shoes. It's not any shoes. It's not the same tariff you bring new shoes or second-hand shoes. And the question is, for those people that have lower skills, where do we expect the jobs to come from if it's not from industries? And doing shoes is linked, or manufacturing shoes is directly linked to the leather industry that we're trying to promote. Now, we can have endless discussions. I'm a development economist by profession, and we always disagree on everything. The chicken and the egg. Do you first start with the production and then you put the tariffs? Do you first start with the tariffs to give an opportunity to production? I'm not sure that there's a right formula, but a decision has to be taken, and I think that is what was done. It was to say, in the context of Rwanda, we've decided, let us increase the tariff on second-hand items because of a variety of issues, but most importantly, how do we create decent jobs for people who have medium to lower skills? As we also think about very high-skilled jobs for these young kids that are getting out of school, having studied nanotechnology, and we have them, you know, computer science, electrical engineering, and so on and so forth. So what we've learned from EDPRS2 is it's not only about creating jobs, it's actually about creating decent jobs. Creating decent jobs, decent is very important.
Very important, I see.
Because countries have learned that you can, as a government, invest in creating jobs, and you create jobs that are below the poverty line. It's actually very possible. So the only factor that actually gets you decent jobs for semi-skilled and, you know, average-skilled people is industrial development. Now, industrial development, if you look at our new strategy or new 7-year government program, industries is actually the sector that is expected to grow the fastest, 13% per annum. Now, where are these 13% per annum going to come from? It cannot all come from the Industrial Revolution. There are some basic items that need to be produced locally in order to produce these decent jobs. Now, leather was chosen for an obvious reason, you know, one cup of family. If we have Girinka, surely, that's a discussion we can have later, but we do not want the cow to just be meat. So if we're thinking about, you know, value addition around these cows that people have all over the country, then we cannot help but think about leather. Now, the most retail application of leather is shoes. You're not holding a handbag, I am. But we're all wearing shoes, right?
That's true.
So the one thing that we all have in common, men, women,
leather.
old, young,
Shoes.
people, is shoes. So if we want to produce leather, I think shoes is a low-hanging fruit.
Well, I think I gave leather as a wild example, but the bigger point I wanted to raise was really around the value addition and sorry, the value chain, and that comes all the way from the raw materials to the production up to when it's produced and for our own local consumption or for export or whatever. And I don't seem to be convinced about the coordination from all that point. And I'll start with at the point of value addition. Of production. I'll give an example of potatoes. Now, we are all under the assumption that the best potatoes or all the potatoes are grown in the northern province. So we have gone ahead and the government of Rwanda, through different agencies, has invested in potato chips companies in the northern province. They go, spend a lot of money in the northern province, set up a potato chips factory, only to realize that the varieties that are grown there are not the ideal ones for producing potato chips. Then you want, okay, fine, did we think it right? Then you say, okay, fine, we're going to set up Ramagana Industrial Park. And then you go to Ramagana Industrial Park, and then after 1-2 factories, you say, hang on a second, we don't have enough power in Ramagana. So my issue is, has it been thought out? Has the entire ecosystem been thought out, or they're just haphazard thoughts being thrown out in the air? Yes.
So I wouldn't call them haphazard, but I think there are definitely some lessons learned. Rwanda is not known, doesn't have an economic, I would say, tradition of industrial development, like some of our neighbors actually have. So there is an element of learning by doing that. I think everybody agrees, you know, has occurred in the past years. Now, one of the things that we've learned is having government set up government-owned incubators in the shape of factory is not working because we are not structured as a government to run small-scale factories, right? So the idea that we're going to de-risk by having small-scale factories ended up being slightly problematic.
You can also say it bluntly that you don't know how to do business.
But I think we know how to do business in some cases. Yeah. Look, we have Rwanda. Yeah. But the most important part, and I think where the government of Rwanda is different from some other government, is that we're very quick to learn our lesson and fall back on our feet. So you were talking about the community processing centers. Right now, they're under privatization through RDB, because we have realized that there is interest from the private sector to take them up, run them more efficiently, and actually adopt the technologies that we've introduced. So I would see it as a problem if we were kind of banging our head against the wall and not wanting to change our strategy. But the fact that we've learned from it, and we're able to say swiftly, okay, you know, let's cut our losses, learn, let's make this an opportunity for the private sector as opposed to wasteful expenditure, and then let's move on to the next way or the next method of helping the private sector, which is the NIRDA open calls, which hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss tonight.
We'll definitely touch on that. But before we go to that, I'd like to also just take a moment to deep dive a bit more into what Charles raised. And for me, it's to do with institutional coordination. And we talk a lot about that on the square. You know, different government agencies often not working in tandem, and at the end of the day, the citizen is the one most affected. And when it comes to industry, and I want to address this to you, it's to do with institutional coordination. You know, last year, Rwanda RSB, Rwanda Standards Bureau, Board, shut down over 150 businesses that were in the banana, wine, and beer processing business. And I know this is a low-hanging fruit for us as Rwanda in terms of it being a particular sector in industry that can be really promoted and really reap benefits for citizens alike. And then at the same time, you know, sometime earlier this year, there was a report in media over in Ramagana, the banana factory wine, which Charles mentioned, the factory that was set up that was just grossly mismanaged. So these are government agencies aimed at really enhancing citizens' livelihoods, you know, whether it's in industry, whether it's in making sure people are taking in safe and safe products. So how do we work with it? You know, and you're someone who is representing government here. What is your take on how we can actually prevent this lack of institutional coordination from happening, specifically in the sector of industry?
So I wouldn't say that the two examples that you've given are related to lack of coordination. I think we are pushing for industrialization, but not at any cost, not at the cost of people's health and you know and safety. So the banana wine producers that were closed down, yes, it sounds like a big number, but let's remember that every village in Rwanda has a small banana wine processing plant.
That's true.
You know, as rudimentary as it may sound. So it's in absolute, it's a big number, but in relative terms, it's actually not that big. But I think there was a campaign about quality and standards, and the banana wine producers at the time did not take it so seriously. Now, where this coordination, I think, is that yes, there was a clampdown by the Rwanda Standards Bureau and the police on those that had very bad production practices. But look, we're here today as NIRDA to say, if you're committed to standards and if you're committed to good production methods, we're here to support you. We're here through the open calls, here to support you. Now, the coordination is done via the Ministry of Trade. I think one thing that is going to help us in the next 7 years is that the government has very openly, through the Made in Rwanda policy, indicated that this is going to be a value chain approach, right? So it's not going to be a product approach. We're not just, I'm not going to come as a DG NIRDA and say, well, let me buy you equipment and then go away, you know? So if we manage, and I think this is really what is at the heart of the industrialization strategy, to all rally, I would say, the forces around one particular value chain. So if you take, for example, banana wine, if we manage to have producers of machineries locally, which is possible because these are Juakali type, you know, machines that are being used. If we manage to boost the producers of machinery, if we manage to de-risk adoption of these machineries by the private producers, if we manage to get them working capital, if TVET manages to teach them, you know, skills related to even things like packaging, branding, marketing, and so on. And then we managed to get the Standards Bureau to actually help them meet all safety standards. Now that's a package for a value chain that can actually transform and modernize an entire value chain. So indeed, I think where we've not been focused enough, and that is highlighted in the National Strategy for Transformation, is that there's been a lot of interventions, but not necessarily around a particular value chain. And this is what we're trying to do now, and this is why I'm here, is because Ministry of Trade has taken a firm decision that from now on, no more individual intervention, let us all rally against, you know, or for, rather, one value chain. I think the Ramagana example is a slightly different one. It's related to the CPCs, or the Community Processing Center that Charles was talking about, which indeed was not very well managed, and I think this is why the factory is not yet operational. But we're very hopeful that now, after privatization, we've seen many privatized factories actually, you know, get out of their distress situation and actually being operational.
So if you don't mind, I want to bring this conversation back to what Charlie was talking about, value chains, because, you know, I think what drives at least the success of Made in Rwanda is its competitiveness. And this is competitiveness against in many aspects. when you think about industrialization or industries, we're talking about businesses. Because at the end of the day, government is not going to build these industries. It's the private sector. Now, when you look at the business case for our competitiveness, especially around price, because I know a lot of people complain and say a lot of the made in Rwanda products that are out there are a bit more expensive than the usual stuff. And you find that one of the things that I personally have seen comes down to, when he talks about the value chain, is the raw material. When you think about building a factory, or when you think about building an industry, you have to consider where you're going to get the raw material. Now, when you look at one of our recent industries, and this is a much larger industry, this is Cimerwa. When you look at why they have been so successful, if you even look at recently, the shareholders of Cimerwa, PPC, reported their annual, they presented the annual report in terms of performance, and they said that Rwanda contributed significantly to their bottom line. And the reason why is because where they're located is where the raw material is. So it enables them to be able to be competitive with the Himas, the Twigas, the Tororo cements, and that is something that gets lost in the conversation around industrialization. And I think more than anything, coming back, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, when we developed a strategy, I understand banana wine. The rationale is around textiles. And also, when you talk of doing something that's different and doing something that's new, I would want to ask, where does the service industry, when I talk of industrialization in the service space, so for example, software, and for the US, it's considered part of an industrialization era. How does that fit into Rwanda's strategy? Considering what I've just mentioned around the raw materials, our inability to, maybe we may not have the raw materials that our neighbors have, we may not have access to a port, we're land-linked or landlocked. How does service industry and the idea that raw materials are not as easily found to enable us to be competitive, how does it fit into our strategy?
So I think the issue of raw materials differ from industry to industry, if I may say, because sometimes we talk about industry as one homogeneous group of factories. If you look at agro-processing and the areas that we focused on in agro-processing, in some areas there's no issue of raw materials, for example, the banana wine. In some other areas like wheat, like some of the maize factories have experienced raw materials issue. The way this has been handled in government, and maybe if you host Minagri, they will be able to shed more light on this, is basically by trying to have a conversation between the industry and RAB, because RAB does the seedling and the seeds certification. And I think for some industries it's been a bit frustrating because that conversation had not happened between RAB, that was in charge of the seedling and having the right varieties, and the industries. And because of that, they've had to import raw materials. But it's not rocket science. This is something that can be fixed. And the position that we've taken is we shouldn't give up on value addition for agro-processing because of this hurdle. Rather, we should address the hurdle. And I believe that this is what Minagri and RAB are currently trying to handle with the industry, having that conversation. Now, we are quite cognizant under the new approach that one of the reasons why our industrial growth has not been as fast as we would have wished is the lack of dialogue between the factories and the raw material producers. Now, if you look at construction materials, for example, I think that has been less of a problem. If you look at the companies that have invested in construction, the issue has been slightly different. It's been about technology choices. So that's another gap that, as Neil, that we want to address, because you'll see many factories have equipment that are used at 20%, 30% capability. Now, it can mean two things. Either you ran out of raw materials, or you made the wrong technology choice when you were setting up your factory. So we want to be with you from the start and be with the industries to try and get this clear from the start. Because if you're going to buy a very large machine and invest a lot of capital from the beginning, not looking at where your raw materials are going to come from, then it's a sunk investment that is wasted. It's wasted capital. So yes, the raw material has to be addressed, but I think the technology choice also is not spoken enough. And when we're discussing with the banana wine producer and even the garment producers, they were like, people always think that we need just equipment. Sometimes we just need knowledge about the equipment. We need to know how much energy it's going to consume. Is it tri-phase? Is it biphase? Is it, you know, what kind of maintenance costs will I face? Is it aligned to my raw materials? Like some of these banana wine producers imported machines from China that are meant for pineapple juice. They don't work for guagua. So I think we need to tackle both. Yes, the raw material in partnership with RAB and Minagri, but also the issue of technology choice within our factories to make sure that they don't do a wasted initial investment.
And can you, while you're on the topic, can you tell us more about the Open Calls program that NIRDA recently rolled out? I believe the deadline is on the 20th?
Yes, the deadline is on the 20th.
Friday.
Friday.
Okay.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So if you can just tell us more about it and what it means for local
So
producers.
Open Call is on New Baby or New Baby products, and basically what we're doing is that we're facilitating companies in particular, or factories in particular value chains, which is garment and banana wine, to acquire equipment. But we're not only giving equipment, we're actually doing an assessment of your farm and trying to see what are the other farm capability that you need. So for example, it may be your business plan is not good, your marketing is not good, or your packaging sucks, or you know, these type of issues that will not be fixed by merely purchasing an equipment. So what we're offering is, yes, purchase of equipment, but also business advisory services and technical advisory services. And then we can train your staff, we can help them get access to industrial knowledge. So we've chosen those two value chains because these are two value chains that don't have an issue with market. As you know, the market for banana wine is very big in Rwanda and in the region. And same for garment for reasons we've discussed. So these are areas, we've done a technology audit. We know there's potential for growth. We know these are areas that have experienced high growth in the past 3 years. They can produce decent jobs if handled properly. And then you can have a big productivity boost if you manage to address these three things: technical, business advisory, and equipment.
And how long is this, the training, and how many companies do you plan to take in, and what's the extended period of training and technical support that you just mentioned?
So the number of companies will depend on how much financing we can leverage. Right now we finance through external partners, but we're still trying to do resource mobilization. Hopefully it should be more than 20 companies. I mean, the more money we get, the merrier, the more we can cover. We don't have a standard. The idea is not to have a standard capacity building program, but more to have something tailor-made for each company. So we look at the company's need and then we provide technical expertise about that particular need. Now, if we happen to have 3-4 companies that have the same need, maybe we can group them together. But the idea is not class style. We bring the 20 companies and give them death by PowerPoint, but rather
death by PowerPoint.
But rather be in their factory, talk to their staff, see how they're organized, and give them like a coaching, an industrial coaching, in the factory. So yes, it will depend. Some may just need equipment and a little bit of, well, banana wine, they all need packaging. We all know the challenge with packaging of banana wine. But so some may need a wider range of support. So it will depend, company by company.
Well, we're going to take a break just for a few seconds. We'll be back after the break. Please stay tuned. We're here talking about local industries in Rwanda and how we can boost them to make them competitive locally, regionally, and also continentally. We are joined by NIRDA, and we'll be hearing more from NIRDA after the break. Please stay tuned. Square. Tonight we are talking about local industries in Rwanda and the development of these local industries, and we are joined here with the Director General of the National Industrial and Research Development Agency, NIRDA. Right now I want to take us a bit into what you said, Kamheta, to do with technology, and this is something that definitely we need to infuse into our industries to really promote their development. And we've reached the Industry 4.0, the fourth revolution, if you will, and I just want to hear from you some of the work that NIRDA, in collaboration with other agencies, is doing to infuse tech, smart technology, modern technologies into local industries in Rwanda.
So we see a direct link between the industrialization and the fourth industrialization for Rwanda. And it came from the fact that right now we're asking young people to create jobs, but it's not so easy to create jobs in the tech world. What we've seen is a lot of government effort has been put into infrastructure, getting us, really good internet, and then giving a lot of support for application young people who are into the apps world. What we're trying to bring as NILDA under Minicom and with the support of MyTech is to say, can we look into hardware development? So software and apps are absolutely needed, and this is already something that has had good success. We all know the tap and go and so on technologies.
Yes.
But now can we go a step further and be a little bit daring and actually venture into hardware development? And if we look at the work that has been done by K-Lab, Fab Lab, some of the TVETs, it's around proof of concept, but we've not yet managed to move from proof of concept to commercialization. So this is the gap that we're coming to bridge as NILDA by having a space. We're creating a space where we can host young innovators around particular technologies, not around products, because we do not want to do the mistakes that others have done, where you just focus on the product and then 5 years later that product has disappeared. You know? So we really want to focus around technology that are versatile in nature. So for example, if you look at energy storage, can we have a generation of young entrepreneurs that can understand solar energy storage? Now, if you understand solar energy storage, then that gives you an edge at the time when we know electric cars are coming, right? So whereas today, maybe the retail market that you'll have for your skills may be solar panels, because of the electricity rollout program, we want to work with you to have versatile skills so that when the electric cars come, you're also able to man an electric car charging station, you know? So it's about the technology without being obsessed by the application and the product, but positioning our young engineers and our young computer geeks and our young innovators. You know, some of these companies are done by finance people, they have no IT background, but trying to say, okay, can we instill and incubate some technologies that we know are going to be disruptive in the future and going to be massive, and give them an opportunity to apply them today, to get a job today, because we cannot just, you know, equip them with electric car charging and today they're unemployed. So there's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, saying, can this skill help you get a decent job today? But how do we keep you on the program to make sure that when these disruptive technologies occur, you come back to our lab, you know, which is a joint lab, and then we help you kind of move with it. Yes.
And while you're talking about this, I'd like to just touch on something, and I think it's something that has been discussed at length in the past. I think it was in the next Einstein Forum, the cow in the car concept. And you're talking about technology, but how do you plan to take all this tech that we're talking about, these disruptive technologies in the future that are going to come? We actually just, you know, it's a matter of time, to the last, you know, to the local, to the mturaji, you know, basically speaking.
I want to combine that with the thinking that, you know, Pichette was talking about rollout of infrastructure to everybody. You know, if you go to certain areas, there's even no network connectivity of mobile phone, and you're saying that we've done a lot in the IT space. So to me, the ideas you're talking about sound too modern, too urban, so to speak. So just to link it with what Diana just said, can you simplify it to the ordinary Muturaji who likes the banana wine? Yes.
So maybe the best way to simplify it is actually to address your question about the cow in the car concept. So the cow in the car concept is basically looking at the cow as in its entire shape and saying, okay, there's the meat, there's the skin for the leather, but there's also the insulin that can come from the pancreas if we have a bit of chemical knowledge in terms of fourth industrial, you know, revolution, if we manage to master the arts of transforming things chemically. There's also the collagen for burnt people in the hospital. There is the horns that can become buttons, or they can become dashboards for cars. And we call it the cow in the car because our objective is to say, okay, we have Volkswagen coming up. How can we make sure that those seats there in X years can actually come from Rwandan cows, you know? So how do we take not only leather for shoes, but now going into high-tech industrial, you know, transformation, chemical transformation. And I think that is where it connects, because imagine if you're a citizen and you have your cow and you take your cow to the abattoir and you're being paid for the horns, the, you know, the tail, the skin, the hooves. It's completely a different ball game for you in terms of value addition than just taking it just for meat slaughtering. So there is a link between industrialization, first industrial revolution, and the cow, because the cow comes from the farmer. The cow is never going to be the property of Volkswagen, right? Exactly. So what we need to look at and what we want to work with young innovators is to say, how do we pick I would say, opportunities that look like that, opportunities that link back to our farmers and our raw materials and what we have in country, whether it is in mining, in farming, but adds massive value by exposing our young people or young entrepreneur to top-edge industrial knowledge. And this has to be done by partnerships, right? So we have to partner with international firms out there that know how to do this best. Now, people may be a bit cynical and say, yeah, but why Rwanda if I can go to China? Well, truth be told, when we've been talking to these high-tech firms, they all want a place where they can start up in Africa, right? They know Africa is growing, they've understood the demographic dividend, and they know where the next market. And they've also understood that in Asia, labor costs are going higher. So if we're able to provide the labor at the level that they want in terms of knowledge, we're able to have labor costs that is competitive with China, which is actually possible, and we have a conducive business environment, then,
And we have rice that is a grain and not a plastic bead.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's okay. But that's standards. That's coming back to standards.
Yes,
and I think this is where we have an edge. And this is why if we invest in standards, and Rwanda products are now known for quality, and this is why you see Rwanda Standards Board is so tough, and they get the support of the entire government, is because, made in Rwanda has to be quality-based. It has to be a proof of quality. Otherwise, we will not make it.
And with that, sorry, before you go to Twitter, did you want to add something, Charles?
No, I was just going to say that I know Pishet talked about not repeating, learning from your previous mistakes. And I want to come back to the issue of institutional coordination. One of the biggest issues I have had with the Imihigo that local leaders sign is that it tends to be so much about them and their districts. And I'll give practical examples. Recently, I think I saw tractors being auctioned, I think early this year. Hundreds of tractors that had been brought in for farmers and they were not being used. And I know I've read about irrigation equipment that does not get used. And probably this particular mayor got amazing marks because they put the irrigation equipment there, or they put the tractors there, and they didn't care how it was going to be handled. And probably the mayor got away with it because he said that is Minagri's job to mobilize the cooperatives. And the cooperatives said, no, we're not going to grow the rice because it takes long for it to be harvested, or we get less per kilo as compared to growing cabbages. So I want to really understand, and from NIRDA's perspective, do you see yourselves in this alone? Obviously, I don't expect a no, but what are you doing to address some of these institutions that are historically known not to be the best of coordinators with their sisters in the game?
Well, that's a tough one. Definitely, we do not do things alone. That's a fact. I think what we're trying to do is to put the farm at the center, or in our case, because NILDA is industrialization, we deal directly with farms, right, and factories, as Ephraim was saying. What we're trying to do is to put directly the factory at the center of what we do. You can do institutional coordination in theory. It works for policy making. When it comes to implementation, it becomes a little bit more problematic. What we've seen works better is to take, we call them clients because we don't like to call them beneficiaries, though they don't pay for the service yet. I'm hoping at some point they'll start paying. But we want to put the client at the center and say, okay, in your case, what are your issues? If it's an issue of standards, the NILDA team should be able to pick up the phone and call the Standard Bureau and say, look, you're not being fair here, or there's a problem here. And basically, the same way RDB does it for the investors, we need to give a similar, I would say, service to the industries, where they do not feel like, okay, but you give me machinery, but now my stuff is stuck in customs because they don't understand that this is an agro-processing machinery. They think it's something else. And we are best placed as a government entity to talk to a fellow government entity and say, look, they're not lying. We actually bought this with them, and these are the manuals, and this is how it works. So as long as we think about NILDA being part of a government team, and actually being a facilitator for government services, as opposed to being one entity that has a mandate and sticks to its mandate, then we can be relevant to our citizen. So yes, coordination is an issue, but I think the way to address it is to come back to the citizen. In our case, come back to the factory and say, okay, in your particular case, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the value of using a value chain approach, is that if you see 6 people with a problem, then you know they are not the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So automatically, you know, something needs to be fixed on the other side, which is the government side. Whereas if you help people in a variety of value chains at the same time, you may not be able to see that pattern. So you may not be able to address it holistically. So that's how we look at it. We look at institutional coordination around the value chain, but around our clients more specifically. And we think that with that, we've seen even with doing business, you know, when you have a holistic approach and you're dealing with particular cases, things move pretty fast, as opposed to just grand statements.
Yeah.
I wish you luck.
And we're supporting and also support. I think we can count on people's support in terms of contributing to really growing industries in Rwanda. I know Ephraim is a business person in some of these commodities that are involved in these local industries.
We need to stop importing.
Yes, that's the plan.
For real, yeah.
That's the plan.
And for coming from a sugar importer, that's a very loud statement.
No, seriously, it makes no sense. Sugarcane can grow in our markets.
Exactly.
I mean, in our economy, it makes no sense why we import so much sugar.
Let's go to, let's just go to our Twitter feed. We want to go to a Twitter feed and just hear from people who have been following the show online. And the first tweet is from Richard Wodira, and he talks about, you know, what we were discussing before, quality. The elephant in the room for Made in Rwanda success and for local firms to be competitive in the local and regional markets is quality, quality, quality. Our people lack the desired knowledge and skills at the market. Quality, technical, and vocational education is key. And this is exactly what you're talking about, Kameta, saying that this is a low-hanging fruit that we know in terms of Rwanda. Quality standards is really something that's enforced, and it's something that we're also not willing to actually compromise on.
Minicom actually did a survey asking people what they thought about the Made in Rwanda products. And the number one, I would say, issue that was raised by Rwandan people was quality. Price was actually number 4, number 5.
Really?
So price was not so much of an issue. What the people who are consuming imported goods mentioned quality, and the people who are consuming local goods were saying, you know, it's a little bit out of patriotism and you know, having a kick on supporting the local industry. But actually, the number one factor is quality. And when we talk to the garment industry, we got exactly the same feedback. They said, well, we get people who want to wear Made in Rwanda, but then the quality is an issue.
That's very interesting, knowing that it was not really so much about price, but quality. And our next tweet is from Jean-Jacques Kofi, and I don't know how you'll answer this, but Jean-Jacques Kofi states that most of the products from Made in Rwanda are very expensive and that other countries' industry, like Volkswagen product, is there any reason to explain that? Because basically, manufacturing a product locally is supposed to be affordable and profitable for the population.
I think I'll disagree a bit with that one. I don't think because it is made locally, it should be cheap. Because I think that's where the person has probably been very economical with their words. But the expectation is that if it's made in Rwanda, therefore it should be cheaper. I wouldn't mind paying a little bit more if it's a Rwandan product that is of quality, because it gives me double satisfaction. It gives me the first satisfaction that it is quality, and it gives me the second satisfaction that I'm supporting homegrown. So, and giving credit where it's due, I think there are some guys who are taking strides, especially in the garments industry. These days, you know, we used to wear a lot of West African shirts, the particular design. Now we're having some of those locally made, and it's an apple for an apple. It's like for like. So there are some strides there.
I would also not disagree, but add another facet to it. You know, the idea of certain commodities, and I say this because we tried to do a bit of value add in the sugar industry, and we were having issues again with the whole idea of affordability. We'll take our products to the market, and guys would be like, why is it more expensive? We're like, no, because we're saving you X, Y, and Z. And they're like, actually, because it's a new product, we want it cheaper. And we were baffled. We're like, at some point, value addition should carry a higher price. But so I'm saying that I think it's dependent on the sectors. when you talk of price. When we think of Made in Rwanda right now, I think the garment industry seems to be at the forefront. That's why people are like, we'll prefer quality over price. But now when you start to get into the basic commodities, you talk of soap, you talk of toilet paper, sugar, people are going to be like, why should I pay extra for such stuff? And I think it's too faceted, or at least that's my view of it.
And also still on the issue, the next tweet, just before we round up, the next tweet is also talking about, quality and price. And this person is called Sarcasm, very interesting Twitter handle. He or she says, can we acknowledge how cheap imports will be the death of local industries that we are trying to build? How can we counter that?
I want to relate with that tweet and give an example of juice.
With the sarcasm tweet?
No, sarcastically talk about homemade juice. Yeah. So take an example of Inyanje pineapple juice or Inyanje orange juice. That is very difficult to find on the shelves in the supermarkets because it is snapped up very quickly. But you will always find Ceres juice or Splash juice of the same flavors, and it will be 200, 300 francs cheaper.
That speaks for itself,
right? Yeah, it just speaks for itself. So I'm like, okay, these guys are paying import duty. Well, maybe Nyanja pays import duty for concentrate. I don't know. Maybe they don't. But it's self-defeating for the consumer. The consumer may tend to associate with a reliable product as opposed to a homegrown one because they're not so sure it will be on the shelves all the time.
Yes, but I think the truth is, can we afford to give up and leave Ceres on the shelf on its own? I don't think so. I think Ceres has been there for now like probably hundreds of years. They've mastered the art of industrialization. We're just starting. And we need to pick areas where we're going to hang on, even though the beginning may be a bit rough. And we've learned that through our policy-making process as Rwanda, that the beginning can be a bit rough, but if you hang on to the struggle, you can actually get something there. So I don't think that we have reached where we want to reach. Definitely not. Can we compete with Ceres? Can Inyange compete with Ceres eye to eye today? Probably not. But I think with a bit of consumer confidence and support from different entities, we can boost that value chain so that, a few years down the line, they actually be cheaper. So that's the other thing that we need to look at. And we're looking at as government, not as an implementing agency, but as a government team, is to say, can we look at the cost of production? Because there are still issues with the cost of production.
Exactly. For instance, and just to touch the cost of production, when we're talking about banana wine and the packaging, they're being told they have to use glass vis-a-vis plastic because we're all trying to get rid of, and very well so, of plastic products. But who manufactures glass in Rwanda? Isn't it expensive to import? Is this a solution you're going to actually tell, the person on a farm, package it in glass?
Can I give you my 2 cents on glass?
Yes.
Let them take a page out of the best, probably the largest distributor of glass, or at least products packaged in glass, Coca-Cola.
Yes.
Coca-Cola, when it comes to their bottles, they ensure that they collect them, then they wash them, sterilize them, and then reuse. And that's a system that can, they do it the world over. And that's a system that can be adopted. Why try reinvent the wheel? And I think because making glass bottles is very expensive, but reusing glass bottles is actually cheaper than using plastic. And that's something I can say in relation to that whole idea of glass. I think that's something that we can learn as, I think even the private sector has to take a little bit of initiative. You can Google and find out how to effectively incorporate glass as a packaging material.
That's very interesting, a very interesting point of information.
I think the competition is a little bit unfair on that point when it comes to packaging materials. And I have a friend who had developed a technology around manufacturing sanitary towels from banana stems. But she could not take her business to another level because of packaging materials. She did not have the right support locally for the right grammage of polythene in which she could put the towels, whereas that is easily available in the other branded markets where the ones that are being imported into the country are coming from. So I think that's another. I don't envy your job at all because the competitive field is not as even, is probably not about to be even. So I don't envy your job at the risk of repeating myself.
So,
Patient,
yeah,
yes.
we've come to the end of the show, as it always is with the very interesting topics, and thank you for accepting our invitation to be on the square. We've come to the end of the show, but I would like, our guest, Kamheta, if you can give closing remarks on competitiveness, boosting local industries in Rwanda, and just, based on what you've shared with us this evening.
Well, I think the strategy, the government 7-year program is very clear. If we want to double GDP per capita in the next 7 years by 2024, industry is going to be the biggest contributor. Now, how we go about it, I think, is being smart, picking technologies that are going to win, and focusing on job and I would say startups for young people. It is also about modernizing our existing industries. We cannot only think about startups, but there is players in the field currently, and they are willing to invest in their own business. I think the onus is now on us as policymakers, as implementing agencies, to give them a tailor-made service that actually suits their needs. The opportunity is there, the time is now, and I think we're clearer than ever that we cannot do without it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining the show, Kamheta. Thank you very much to Ephraim and Charles. Always a pleasure to go back and forth with you on the square. Thank you very much for staying tuned. Please follow this conversation as it continues on our Twitter page using hashtag #TheSquareRW. Catch a repeat tomorrow on Rwanda Television at 2:30 p.m. and we'll also share this via our YouTube channels for those people who are not in Rwanda or those people who didn't have time to watch the show this evening. Thank you and have a very good evening.